Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us for this afternoon's masterclass. We will just slowly wait for attendees to join us. And whilst we do, let me introduce the session that's about to start post-lunch. I can see attendees joining us shortly. I will open by saying this is going to be, with your help, an interactive, interesting, valuable discussion. So I encourage you all to listen and to speak with the panels, to ask questions and to get involved. I have the absolute pleasure of chairing this panel session, which is a masterclass on how can better D&I policies build better businesses. This is a masterclass with quite an immature title, actually. So I think everybody here, especially those in the social value community, understand that better D&I policies, better diversity within organisations build stronger, more resilient businesses. And we have a wonderful panel with us who are going to talk on this very subject. So let me introduce the panel by name, and I'll invite you, panel, to introduce yourself, your title and your organisation before we kick off. All right, let me start with Rebecca. Good afternoon.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you for having me today. So my name is Rebecca Percy. My role is Diversity and Inclusion Lead for E.ON UK.
Great, thank you so much. Joni.
Hi everybody, hopefully you can all hear me. Thank you so much for having me. My name's Joni Clark, my pronouns are they, them. I'm the lead trainer for EDEI and LGBTQ+ at an organisation called the Diversity Trust.
Thank you so much for joining us. And last but not least, Sophie.
Hi everyone, it's great to be here. My name is Sophie Amato-Perton. I am the People Director with Social Value Portal.
Very good. All right, well, hopefully the audience will be pleased to know we don't have a big presentation deck. What we wanted to do is really to open up to the panel and to talk to them and to hear from them on a few things. I think we'll start with how you found yourselves here. How are you a practitioner in this space? And what does good look like when we talk about strong D&I policies within your organisations? So I'm going to carry on as we started. Rebecca, would you mind kicking us off?
Yes, of course. So I've been in my role as a D&I lead for just over 5 years. And I think I'm in a really privileged role. I'm very fortunate to be able to do the things that I do and to work with the people that I work with. But how did I get here? I think, do you know, it's a funny one, isn't it? When you start to look back, and as you get older, there's more and more to look back on. But I've spent a lot of my career in engagement, so spent 15 years within internal comms and engagement. And the thing that really drove me there was understanding the relationship that people had with the organisation and how we could make it better and how we could make work better and deliver better business performance through creating that right culture and that right environment. And I think that has been a big personal driver for me as part of my own sort of personal purpose and understanding what I get from a role and the things that give me satisfaction. It is being able to make that positive difference. And the great thing with D&I is it goes across everybody and everything and everybody's different life stages. And I think when this role came up 5 and a bit years ago, I just felt a real pull, and I knew that that was where I needed to be. So moving from an engagement background into an HR role was a bit of a leap. I don't really have a particular HR background, but I did really feel that it was something where I could make a difference. So I've got experience in change management and project management too. And for me, it was how all those things came together, unfortunately at the right time for me to make that move. And I think from a personal point of view, I do feel I'm really strongly motivated by fairness and trying to getting rid of injustice and trying to remove barriers for people. I think we've all experienced different things, haven't we, growing up and through different career experiences. And like, I'm not really sure what happened there and why that was happening to me. And a big part of it is, I guess, trying to help people to see those things that weren't visible to them before, and how can we equip people with the tools to overcome them themselves, but also as an organisation, what can we do? What are the structural things? What are the policies that we need to build on? And I really do see the policies piece as being your starting point and your kind of ground bed, really, in terms of what you then build on.
Thank you so much. And just when you're on that, just before we move over to Joni, when Fiona in the chat has asked us what we mean by better, and I'm sure we'll all have slightly different versions as we respond to that. What does it mean to you, Rebecca?
I'm not sure I understand what the question, Fiona. Do you mean in terms of better? Oh, okay. Okay. So, okay, let me take an example of something that we worked on a couple of years ago. So one of the big things that we have been looking at, and one of the measures we look at, is pay gaps. So looking at gender pay gap and looking to try and understand what are some of the reasons behind gender pay gap. And if anybody is familiar with it and familiar with the research from Claudia Golding, you'll know that actually a large part of gender pay gap is driven by some of those societal factors around having children and building families, and then those gendered expectations that are then put on parents. So one of the things that we introduced was equal parent leave, because what we wanted to try and do was to try and challenge this societal norm that it's a mum and a dad, and the mum looks after the baby most of the time and works part-time. And we also wanted to make sure that we had provision there for LGBT plus families too, who weren't probably considered in some of those policies. So you could see from a family perspective why that's important. But we know that from a cultural point of view, that would help with gender pay gap. But then if you look at some of the research around equal parent leave, the benefits of that are huge from a societal perspective. So you can have things where it improves mental health for both parents. We're providing an inclusive organisation for LGBT plus parents who might otherwise be trying to find out where in the policy does my journey fit. And then if you look more broadly, there are things around how it can improve children's exam results. So we've got something that we're doing for us as an organisation that has an immediate benefit for our people, but there are much wider benefits to that as well. So I think there's kind of different layers that you can do in terms of driving what that better can be.
I agree with you, and really far-reaching benefits of a policy like that, especially when we consider the impact of parenting on early child development. So very clear. Thank you for that, Rebecca. Joni, allow me to invite you to introduce yourself and what you do and where you do that. And if you could share with us how you got here, that would be really intriguing.
Happily, yeah. So I am predominantly a trainer and consultant. I originally focused very much on LGBTQ issues, particularly trans and non-binary, but also more broadly looking at EDEI, so equality, equity, diversity and inclusion. In terms of how I got here, I've been in this role for 4 years in this role, though I was with the Trust for a year before that as what was called a lived experience contributor. So I've kind of come via a very almost kind of out of community organising, voluntary sector stuff. So I used to be working, used to do a lot of work in the community up in Leeds, where I'm from, basically ran, co-ran, I should say, with all respect to my co-organisers, support groups, peer advocacy groups. We'd accompany people through various systems to make sure they were being supported and knew their rights. Did quite a lot of freelance training for organisations, public sector, third sector, and then sort of saw an advert from the Diversity Trust looking for lived experience contributors in their training sessions. Went along, and I am a gob on a stick. So very quickly they were like, "Yeah, would you like to be a full trainer?" And I said yes. And sort of have been doing this since then. I kind of, a huge part of my belief and practice around this is that often people just don't have a space to to have a conversation from where they are. There's a real fear about getting things wrong, and that stops people from ever getting to the point where they can get it right. So a lot of my work is trying to provide those spaces for people to just have those conversations and unpick stuff and work through where they're at, so they can get to a point of understanding. In terms of what good looks like and kind of what do we mean by better, I think good to me looks very much like a lot of staff engagement. I think what I encounter quite often in my work is a disconnect between the goals of leadership and how that is being felt on the ground, so to speak. So people might, they're aware that there's a push for more EDEI, but they still find that they're having experiences in the workplace that perhaps when they bring them up aren't understood with necessary nuance. It might be that all the people in your HR function are white and you've experienced racism, and it's not completely legible to the people who are there to support with it. So I think it looks like a lot of staff engagement. I'm a big proponent of workplace democracy, so staff networks being involved in decision making, in helping people in positions of power understand and pass the nuance of particular experiences and cases. I think that's a really powerful way we can look forward. And in terms of better, I think what better looks like, I think, it is one of those things where it kind of means across the board. I'm like a big believer in the benefits of EDEI, and there is kind of a lot of evidence to support it. I think the Harvard Business Review has a lot of bits and bobs about what works and what doesn't, but we do see that organizations with more diverse leadership and more diverse workforces tend to be more innovative, tend to have, where they're actually happy and included, they have lower staff turnover, happier workers are more productive. And, this is intuitively obvious to me, but there's also research to back it up. A lot of it is stuff that I think we intuitively know, right? If you have a mixture of people in the room, you've got more points of view, more people can come up with different ideas, you can create more innovative solutions to problems. So yeah, as much as I think it's the morally correct thing to do, there is also evidence that it increases your income, increases your innovation, increases happiness. To me, it's better across the board.
Absolutely. No, it's a really full response. Thank you, Joni. I am going to come back to you, and I'm going to ask you, how did you leave anything behind as a community champion or as an individual advocate coming into the corporate world? Was there anything you had to compromise, or anything that you don't really do anymore that you wish you could still do? But before I come and ask you that, I'd like to speak with Sophie, who I know firsthand is a massive champion for employee engagement and employee networks. And I'd like you, Sophie, if you could, just to respond to Kelly's question. She's asking how networks can be included in decision making, and I think that's in relation to employee networks. Really contributing to those big decisions on D&I policies. So please introduce yourself, Sophie.
Sure. Thank you, Leyoh. So I have been working with startups and scale-ups in tech for, I calculated this in prep for this panel, for 21 years now, which is a bit scary, but the last 3.5 of those have been spent with SVP, leading the people function. And how I came to this space was I actually started my career in recruiting, which for any recruiter with us today, you may remember a couple of decades ago, this was mostly about ticking boxes when it came to diversity and inclusion. When I transitioned into HR, this became more about writing the policies that support the people. And now, many years on, my stance on this is how we not just create the policies to enable our people to thrive and flourish, but how we embed them properly. So they're not just a tick box exercise. For me, it's all about embedding. I will give you my sort of stance on what good looks like before I come back to that question, if that's okay, Kelly. So I think we're all in complete agreement that having diverse teams does help companies to outperform their competitors, and there's no doubt about that. What I quite enjoyed, my personal sort of shift on that came from years ago when I was trying to really champion EDI as a concept. The response I had from many executives was it's too fluffy, it's a nice to have, but the extensive research that we saw, particularly between, I think it was 2015 and 2020, showed the links between profitability and productivity and EDI, making it so much more tangible. We had the data to lean back on. We could really champion it with some power and data behind us, which was what really empowered me in my own role. So what good looks like in this space for me is really, when you hear the word policies, it sounds very dry, it sounds very compliance based. So the key for me is bridging the gap between compliance and belonging. It's easy to fill a policy gap with some legal obligations, but that doesn't really inspire a sense of belonging. So for me, the sweet spot is to allow every employee, from the minute they accept an offer, to see themselves reflected in that organisation. They want to know, do I have a voice? How do I amplify that? How do I voice concerns? Will my manager have my back? And so it's so much more than compliance, especially when you ask the question, are there people here like me? So from a sort of people director perspective, you want every person joining to have no doubt that they've joined the right place and that they are somewhere that they belong. And to come back to that earlier question about better, for me, it just means that it's never finished. This is not a one and done activity. You don't just write a policy and keep your fingers crossed that it's going to make a difference. You have to continuously learn in this space. You have to continually iterate your policies, your procedures, to make sure they're having the right impact. But finally, Kelly, apologies, coming back around to your question. So how networks can contribute to decision making. So it's a really interesting question. I think that networks, especially networks of employees, have to contribute to decision making because you're making the decisions for them, to support them. We have a few ways of doing this within SVP. First of all, we have our 15-person strong inclusion committee. So for a business of 120 people, to have over 10% of those people be involved in our EDEI initiatives, activities, the policies, the data behind them is hugely valuable. So for anyone contemplating how to create an inclusion committee, I strongly advise you to reflect on how you can create an internal group to help champion those activities across the business. And a lot of that is to do with engagement. But also it's just leveraging the right sort of mechanisms, making sure you've got a way of people providing meaningful feedback on a regular basis to tell you whether your policies, procedures are actually working, if they're hitting the right notes. So it's definitely a collaborative effort.
I agree. Thank you, Sophie. And Kelly, I hope that answered your question. Very happy to take other questions in the chat. I'm going to move on now and just, first of all, wish everybody happy Diwali. So hello, Fozia, happy Diwali to you. And as we move into this next discussion, I'd like to consider what Fozia is challenging us with. And she's saying, how do we, well, first of all, are your organisations celebrating any other cultural or religious celebrations apart from Christmas? And what does that look like when we consider that most organisations up until very recently have made note of other celebrations, but you might not have always had a day off, or we might not have put resource and budget behind these other celebrations. So I'd like to ask two questions of the panel. I'm going to come to you first, Rebecca. Mm-hmm. Are you recognising other cultural and religious celebrations? But also, when we are budget and time and resource constrained, how do we do our best to balance all of the occasions, all of the underrepresented groups as fairly as possible? I'd love to hear how you're meeting that challenge.
Yeah, happy to. So starting again from a policy perspective, we do have a religion in the workplace guide, which was something that was co-created with colleagues, and just it's really designed for managers. So how do you make sure that you're recognising those important things to those people on your teams in terms of their religious beliefs and those different cultural celebrations? So again, we've got something to base things on. We do recognise and celebrate a lot of different religious celebrations and cultural days throughout the year. our approach is very much led through our inclusion networks. So we've got 9 different inclusion networks, and we will work with them on those dates and what that looks like. So it looks very different depending on what it is. But for example, if I take ED for an example, so earlier this year, we had a leader that wanted to share a bit about his experiences, and he created a bit of an ED challenge. So people could join in with fasting during the day and then share their experiences. And the idea behind that really was to just create a little bit of empathy and understanding so that we could support our colleagues who were celebrating it at that time. So we are very much, it's not something that is delivered and pushed from a central perspective. We are very colleague led and respond to how colleagues want to recognise and celebrate those different celebrations and different days through the year. So as I say, we do allocate a bit of budget to our networks. So if there's things that they want to spend money on, we'll review that at the start of the year and have a look at how we can allocate that in the fairest and best way. We've done things, for example, like webinars, where we've pulled together a few of our networks, and we've talked in those how people celebrate and what are the different customs that they have and what are their favourite bits and what do they enjoy most about those things. And what we wanted to do with those, again, is just build that understanding and that empathy and just share some of those experiences together.
Very exciting. I can't wait to see the calendar of events. I'm sure everybody's enjoying them. I'd like to move on, Rebecca, because I think it's almost impossible for us to discuss our EDI policies now when we consider the executive orders that have come out of the US and how we are all responding to them. So can I just ask you just to regroup for a moment, consider where we've been and what you've built, and all of the work and the efforts and the progress. And if we think about the title of our conference and we consider the space in which we're operating, how are things now? What's changed? How do you feel about the political and social environment that we're in? I'll start with you, Joni.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's such a good question. It's really, I think, refreshing to be able to talk about it in this kind of space, because I think very often in the world of business we can be a little bit nervous to talk about wider political contexts, which is silly because we exist within them. So it's good to be able to talk about it. I think one thing we noticed in particular, so obviously a lot of our work is training and consultation with client organizations. We noticed in the last couple of years that some of our long-term clients who we had ongoing work with each year either radically scaled down or cut some of their EDEI work. Some of that will be because of financial headwinds. There's a lot of other economic stuff going on, but some of it is tied to this kind of shift in how we think about EDI. By the same token, though, we noticed that other people, like with so much nowadays, it's kind of polarized the situation. So the people who had that kind of shallow commitment, maybe they were there primarily motivated by the stick rather than the carrot. They were like, oh, we've got to do this. They have dropped it or scaled back. The ones who recognize the real intrinsic value of this, the rewards it can offer for business, dare I say it, the moral arguments for a lot of this work, a lot of them have responded to this by leaning into it harder and saying, well, actually, this climate, this context means that the diverse and marginalized people that we employ and that work with us are facing additional challenges. Last summer, we had a lot of organizations reaching out saying, how do we support our Black and brown staff at a time when there are race riots taking place across the UK? And they were asking for things, how do we ensure they're safe when they're traveling? How do we make sure that we're providing a supportive space for them in work to respond to a lot of very traumatic input they're receiving? So it really is a case of, a polarization. And I think the last thing I'll say is that I think it also is seeing conversations shift slightly, because for a long time, we've been able to sort of say, this has been the cultural center. and it's been possible to adopt EDI without really having to get into the fray. And what we're kind of noticing is that we're having to say to people, it is getting to the point now where you have to decide what kind of organisation you are and make that decision and plant your flag in the sand, basically. And I think that is a real shift for some people culturally, to find yourself having to actually fight for these values rather than them being kind of the center point expectation. So yeah.
I'd like to come to you, Rebecca, before we come to you, Sophie. And how has this felt for you personally? So when we consider just seeing some of the changes that Joni's described, how does it make you feel, and what are you doing at E.ON in response?
Okay. So I think that it's not created a decision point for us at any time. I think we are really established in terms of our approach to D&I. It's integral to how we work, to our values, to our leadership and board's values as well. So there's never been any conversation at all around that. It has more been around how do we support our colleagues and how do we look after people in a way that we can ensure that everyone feels respected and that work is a safe place for them. And I think that is a really important thing for us to do. I do feel really sad in a lot of ways. I feel sad for the people who work in those organisations who aren't able to visibly support in the same way that they have before, who are trapped in that point of tension. And then also for the people who are having the experiences where they're feeling unwelcome in spaces where they weren't before. I know, talking to some of the people who belong to our Embrace network, which is our racial inclusion network, they were sharing their experiences and their stories about the far-right protest that happened, and some of their adult children had been caught up in that, and how they reflected that they'd never kind of had that feeling, or that feeling of being unwelcome before. So for us, really, it is about acknowledging the impact that this has on people outside of work. And we bring all of ourselves to work, don't we? And recognising that and making sure that we're acknowledging those things, that there is some visible routes of support for people if they want to reach out to those, and that there is somebody there to put, well, it's kind of putting your arm around people, isn't it, during these times, and making sure that they do feel looked after and respected.
And it's just so refreshing to hear that it's not a fight in the organisations where you are working or where you are supporting, Joni. Sophie, where there are some of our audience who are in maybe smaller or less mature organisations, and they're really trying to get that top-down support, or they're trying to influence the exec to do more or to go further, how do you recommend, or from your experience, what's the most effective way to secure leadership support, or to help to build that culture where it's not as mature as it is with Rebecca and Joni?
Yeah, sure. That's a great question. So I think it comes back to understanding who the workforce actually are. We had a few ways of finding that out within SVP and also previous businesses. So I would recommend to any of the sort of smaller, less mature organisations to get a real sense of who your people are, tune in, ask for feedback, ask about how they're feeling, but also ask them to respond to diversity surveys to get a real sense of, of who the company. People often refer to the company. We forget a company is just people, right? So who are your people? What do they care about? And once you've got a good sense of that, it's much easier to put the right initiatives in place. I personally went from responding with a very reactive stance to trying to be much more proactive in making sure I understand what people are experiencing, what they're going through. So that may also be something that others can lean on, can take advice from. And to sort of get engagement and buy-in from executives, I would, once you've got the understanding of who your people actually are, then try to shift the narrative from being this is what we've done in the past, this is what we think we should do, to position it as we should do this because it's equity in action, rather than just putting a policy in a handbook. We're doing this because we want to shift things from here to here, and just trying to contextualize that. Once we had a sense of our own workforce, we realized that 91% of our employees were university graduates, which is actually disproportionately high when you look at, I think it was 34% of the UK are. So then we thought, right, are there any barriers to entry? How do we level things up for non-grads? And then taking action from the back of that is the equity in action piece that I was referring to. So rather than just talking about it, actually do something, show that you're breaking down those barriers, show that you have a proactive, preventative stance. And then that way you can really sort of get the buy-in of execs around you.
Thank you, Sophie. I'd like to stay here around university education, because it feeds really well into social mobility. And we've had a question which I'd like you to both think about, or to all think about. But Rebecca, I'd just like to hear your thoughts first.
Okay.
Do you think that social mobility should sit within EDEI and networks under exactly the same approach, or should it be considered differently due to the intersectionality of it and the debate over definition and how it's measured? Should it stand alone? Social mobility impacts all of our groups, or should it be integrated as other things are? What are your thoughts on that, and how do you approach it at E.ON?
So I think it depends where you are in terms of your journey, and how well established is what is the infrastructure. So the policies, the processes, the networks, the colleague voice channels, how well established are they? And that really is your starting point. Is it something that could be tackled on its own because it needs that impetus behind it, or actually are you at a level of maturity where it can be absorbed as an intersection across those other areas of activity and topics that you have? And I think it should absolutely be part of the DEI approach, because it does cut across in so many different ways, doesn't it? And I think your approach is what's going to work best for you and your organisation. But I think that the starting point is starting with understanding your data, understanding who gets into your organisation, what happens to them when they join, and what does that look like in terms of their opportunity to develop, opportunity to build their career, how engaged are they? And then you'll be able to decide what's the best approach for it. I think for us, it cuts across in lots of different ways, and our networks are at a point where they are really quite mature, and we're starting to take different topics and look at those collectively and together, because we really do recognise that our networks are colleague-led. Everybody's time is incredibly precious, and we want to make sure that everybody's having the right impact. And I think in terms of other things that we do around social mobility, we made the decision as an organisation a few years ago to move away from graduate schemes, and now we offer degree apprenticeships. So there is an international grad scheme that our group company run and look after, but for us, for the last 5 years, our focus has been on degree apprenticeships, getting those established and making sure that we are attracting a wide range as much as possible from as many demographics as we can possibly measure with that. A lot of what we do internally in terms of development, we moved away from talent pools. So there isn't the process of where you have to be forwarded by your manager. Our development is available through development networks with focus on particular areas, because we recognise that sometimes, again, once you're in, there are those additional barriers if you haven't had that experience and that support from your wider network to help you get on in that way. And I would also say the work that we do through apprenticeships has really helped in that space too. So the people who haven't had opportunities to get the formal development that way, we've managed it through that. So we don't have an inclusion network as such around social mobility. Where we are is like embedding it into everything that we do. And that's not to say that that may not change over time. If we get a group of colleagues who are saying, do you know what, despite all this, we still feel that there's some barriers that we need to address, we would start, as we do with these requests, is to listening where they are, understanding a bit of data and some insights, and then look at what we need to provide around that.
That's really helpful, practical examples of what you've done, Rebecca. Thank you for that. I want to come almost to the other side again now of maturity. And Joni, I want to take one of the questions from the audience around safe spaces. So when you enter organisations where this is either very new to leadership, or there's been a challenge, or you're trying to establish a safe space, or certainly establish a safe discussion, where do you start with that? Have you got some tips for the audience as to how they could start to approach these conversations if they've not felt safe in the past, or they're entering new challenges and they're really doing their best to create this safe space? Where do they start?
It's such a good question. I think there's so many things you could consider. I think one of the first things is getting used to and understanding that conflict can be safely held within the workplace. I think there's a real eagerness to avoid conflict because that feels like something has gone wrong. And ironically, that ends up with the people who already have soft power in that space getting what they want because people are scared for conflict. So I think cultivating a culture where people see in action that they can challenge and disagree, maybe have quite an intense disagreement, and then repair that and still be okay with each other. And I think that is something that leaders have to model. I think it's something that we all have to take some accountability for, is not to avoid conflict, but understand you can navigate it and you can repair and you can come out the other side safely. Equally, I think the question is all talked about, should we be worried about offending people if they don't agree with our point of view? I think there's so much in there we could pull apart, and I think sometimes we get really worried about causing offense. No one has the right to not be offended, and I think we need to ground our discussions always in the reality of a situation. So, you know, if someone doesn't like hearing something, we can sort of say, okay, well, what is it that you don't like about that? Meet them in good faith, kind of get into it and give them space to talk about it. Because I believe personally, and I think, you know, there's some evidence to support this, very often when people are offended or angry that something's being talked about, it's because they feel like it's pulling focus away from some kind of unmet need that they have. So, you know, they're tired of hearing about X, Y, Z. Well, maybe it's because they want to talk about A, B, C that's affecting them. So if you can find out what that is, their offense can be a useful jumping off point, because all being offended is having a powerful emotional reaction. So if you can understand where that's coming from, you can start to get into it. I tied a little bit back to what we were talking about, socioeconomic background and class. You know, I think a problem of the last 15 years post-Equality Act is that they didn't include class or socioeconomic background for lots of legal and social reasons, but it's created this issue where we've not talked about class discrimination much in these spaces, and it means a whole bunch of people that are facing a type of discrimination are being left out of a lot of these discussions, and that can be where that offence and that resistance comes from. So yeah, meet them in that and sort of try and understand where it's coming from, what's not being met. But I would always say, don't let safety become the absence of challenge or conflict. It's about safe repair. Would be my take.
I agree. Thank you, Joni, for that really full response. So what we're going to do just before we go to our last question, I'd just like you to give us your what next position. We've got here, we've done a lot of work. We are at a moment, a big moment. You referred to it lightly, Joni. Well, that's not quite lightly for quite a serious topic. Some people have felt left behind, and we find ourselves in very turbulent times as a result of that ignorance or exclusion. of a certain voice. When you consider where we've been over the summer and we think about going into 2026 with the challenges that we've got, you're both very experienced and or working within very mature organisations. Sophie, from our perspective, I would suggest that we're pretty progressive, but we've still got some work to do. So what is next? What's on your horizon? And this might be personally or professionally. Where would you like to get to? If we consider that things are critical, what do we need to do? Rebecca, hopefully you allow me to pick on you first, but if Joni, you're ready to go, then
Rebecca, would you like to
go? Yeah, I can do. So what's next? I think it's we will just be carrying on as we were, which is really quite a bit of a boring answer, but it's one of these things. I often liken it to getting fit and being well and doing exercise. Consistency is really, really important, and that carrying on with that consistency, committed to what we're doing, and keep on doing those things and that approach. So there's not going to be anything, I don't think, really like radical that changes. I mean, we have some emerging things that are coming out that we're working on. So disability has been a big topic for us this year, and we've done a lot of work with our adaptability network around hosting an experiential event for people to understand the impact of invisible disabilities, and that's having some really good impact in terms of people being able to talk about it more, and making adjustments, and people that potentially haven't spoke about it but feeling confident enough to share it. So we'll keep on doing those sort of things. We're also doing some work on neurodiversity, because again, just to cross over with social mobility, if you look at workforce participation and the number of people who are neurodivergent, and particularly for people with autism that are either not in a job or underemployed, it's huge. So again, these things all cut across one another, and I think one of the things that we're looking to do next year, and a big thing for me, is just much more of a collaborative approach on different topics as they emerge. So how do we leverage what we've got in the best way? So something that seems to be coming out and emerging at the moment is financial well-being, and how that impacts on different groups of people. So we'll just be responding to those things, keep listening to what our colleagues have got to tell us, looking at how we respond to what happens externally, and keeping up that consistency.
Very reassuring. Continue as you have. Joni, over to you.
Yeah, so I think almost going back to the start when you sort of asked me, is there anything you left behind moving into a more corporate space? I think this is something that I've tried really hard to bring with me, is being a challenging voice and just being honest. And I think I absolutely agree with Rebecca that consistency is really key, but I think we need to start to bolster ourselves for what it's going to take to keep that consistency up as we enter really possibly quite intense headwinds, shall we say. I think we need to really start doubling down and building the case for why we're doing EDEI, why it matters. I think we do need to be including socioeconomic background and class as far as we can. It can be tricky to define in a particular English context. You can have a billionaire who speaks with a strong Yorkshire accent, and in the wrong room they might experience classism despite being a billionaire. So it's a tricky one, but we have to have the conversation about it, and make sure everybody realizes they've got skin in this game. Don't make it just about certain groups and not others. I think that's really important. I think there was a question somewhere that I've now lost, but it mentioned, are some businesses wary of taking a position for fear of adopting a political stance? I very much believe that we are past the era of liberal centrism. I don't think that's the environment we're operating in anymore. It is not possible to do this without adopting some kind of political stance, because it is quite political work with a small p. Who gets to do what, who gets to progress, who gets access to resources and power and decision making is the essence of politics, right? And I think the challenge for a lot of organizations is going to be, as that landscape changes, do they try and change with it to remain safe, and that will make it very challenging, I think, to be consistent with this work when it potentially loses favour? Or are organisations going to really stand on business and say, well, maybe this is going to be a political choice, but we know that it yields benefits for us. We know that it's the right thing to do for our staff and colleagues. And the last thing I'll say is that businesses have power outside of just their internal structure and employees. Very, very often it's small business, it's medium business. They'll pick a size, they'll say XYZ sector doesn't want this, or we're going to cut this regulation or that and the other. It's powerful when businesses speak up and say, actually, we found this has been really useful. This has yielded these benefits. This has yielded results. So I think, yeah, what's next, it's going to look like people really standing up for what they believe in as an organization. It's going to involve making a choice to maintain that stance. And it is absolutely, as Rebecca said, going to mean keeping up with that consistent dedication to change, even if the headwinds are against you.
I agree with you, and we've seen that across the social value space. Decisions to cancel policies as a result of the executive orders in one territory have had a direct impact on business standing and let's face it, revenue in another territory. So we're seeing the difference as a result of businesses deciding where they stand and which side of the line they're on. So thank you for that. Sophie, I'm going to ask you the same question, and then we are going to lighten things up a little bit. And I'd like to hear your good news stories, especially like some really positive stories about cultural change, where you've seen or you've experienced a discussion, an event that has had that change to culture that you cannot manufacture. So I'd like you to think about that, please, Rebecca and Joni. And Sophie, just from you, just to close this point, what is next? What have I got to look forward to at SVP, which is coming next from your policies?
Sure. So, I mean, from a people team perspective, what's next for us is to, exactly as Rebecca said, just we are going to continue doing what we're doing without slowing down, without being fearful of not slotting into a certain political view, but we're going to continue to lead with empathy, listen to our employees who make the business successful, but also just embrace that continuous development and try to stay curious, iterate boldly, see what happens. So from a people team, that's what I would say is next. But we've also reached a bit of a turning point within the business itself, because we've just rolled out our first ever mandatory company-wide EDEI training, and that's at every level, from a new starter in a junior role to the CEO. Everyone takes this training. And it started as very much a sort of awareness of the big topics: neurodiversity, disability, mental health. But then as I was developing the training, I realized how helpful it is to really dig into the areas that can actually impact someone's everyday experience of being an employee with the business. So that's led to training on microaggressions, harassment, discrimination, how to respond if you witness an instance of microaggression, how to report it. So we've now got lots of different ways of people feeling seen and heard. Again, it leans on that sense of proactive and preventative measures rather than just being responsive and reactive to legislation. And hopefully it reinforces that stance of equity in action. So that's what's next for us, as well as analysing all of the data that we've collected this year and really trying to remove any barriers to entry, to development, upskilling, empowering people with the tools to self-advocate. So I think it's going to be a pretty exciting time for SVP.
Thank you, Sophie. Audience, before I come and speak to our panel about a special, memorable event that's changed culture around them, I'd like to throw last questions to you, please. So if you have any questions that we've not answered, or if there's something that you'd specifically like to ask a member of the panel, please pop that in the chat and I will pick them up as we go. Rebecca, do you have a moment in mind, positive or negative, that just helped you to see that change in culture, or opened people's eyes, or just took people from one place to another? That is quite memorable.
Yeah, can I have two?
Of course.
So
The more the
one
merrier.
was with our old CEO. So we've been doing some work on part-time working and looking at career mobility. And I'm really fortunate that we have a really great people analytics team, and they had done some analysis for me, and we'd worked out that if you were working part-time, you were sort of, I don't know, you had 1/5 of the chance of moving roles because of the lack of opportunities. And I took this to the board and presented to them, and our old CEO was really shocked by it, and he just sat back in the chair and went, right, that's a massive problem. And I think it was really powerful thing to see how that data then led us on to make a lot of policy changes and doing some more listening. So I think that was something for me that just really demonstrated how you can use those insights to engage that group, but also then to then have the mandate to make changes. And then I think the other one is a bit broader. So for all our networks, when we first start and at various points, we do a lot of listening sessions. So it can be on a specific topic, or it can be really general. But sitting in those sessions, whether they're face-to-face or they're virtual, and we do them really, really regularly on a whole host of topics, but just seeing people and get that understanding and that empathy is just really powerful. And it might be one person at a time who is going through this journey of understanding and getting it. But I think that's the thing that I always come away from those sessions, having learned something myself every time. You really don't understand the things that people are going through and the experiences that you've had. And I think from those, we've just generated a lot of understanding and empathy and trust in the organisation. And I think that is really, really important for anything you do on DEI, is having that trust and belief, and not being viewed as ticking boxes. And you have to, you make your commitment and you living up to it. And that's one of the ways that I think we're able to prove that, and responding to that feedback too, not just nodding and going, okay, thank you for sharing. If we're learning something through that, what can we do better?
And digesting it, and those feelings can't be unfelt, right? Those lessons cannot be unlearned. And I think just going back to one point in the chat before I actually raise another question, Fiona said, don't underestimate the power of training. And I think we all feel pretty well informed, especially of those of us on the panel, but that repeat of training, refreshed training, new perspectives is so important, even for those of us that feel we're doing pretty well practicing. I'm very conscious of time, so Joni, I will ask you about your cultural changing moment, but I'd just like to pick up on a question from Teresa. And Teresa, I apologise for missing your question. I was actually looking in the wrong place. So Teresa would like to specifically know from Rebecca and Sophie if they will include accessibility and supporting people with disabilities in their D&I strategy. Social mobility and accessibility are closely linked. Rebecca, you did speak to this. Might be just worth just reminding us what you'd said. And then Sophie, if we could come to you just to answer Teresa's question, that would be great. She follows up by saying, in her experience, accessibility and the resulting social impact is not being recognised, and measuring tools do not seem to cover this area, and the related metrics are not being developed. That is a fantastic point, Teresa, which I will raise with our measurement team. So I will take that away and follow up with you. But if you could just pick up, Rebecca, on the first part of her question, that would be really helpful. And then we'll throw to you, Sophie.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. So accessibility and disability is a big part of our approach in terms of D&I. It sometimes can be something that's harder to get people to engage with. So that's part of the reason why we've been doing this work on this experiential event, is to try and open up different ways into the conversation. Where we want to get to is a place where the adjustments are just made, and everything is made as easy as possible to access. So there's no need for people to disclose or to go through anything like that. If you need something, that is there for you. So that's part of what we've been doing with our network, and the work that we're doing with Genius Within will hopefully get us to that point as well. But we do see it as really important, and as you say, there is a huge crossover with social mobility too. The cost of having a disability is so high, just in terms of the impact on your cost of living, that again, there's barriers on barriers for people in that place. So yeah, it's an incredibly important topic.
And just to address the question of whether we are embedding them into our strategy, yes, of course, we already do. So within hiring, we ask for any accessibility requirements during the interview process. We also, once an offer is made, we ask if they would need any reasonable adjustments to help equip them with what the people need in order to achieve success in that role, and that could be anything from equipment or software requirements to specific coaching or any other tailored support. So that's always been our approach, to provide a safe place for respectful disclosure, followed up with an occupational health assessment, and then implementation and regular reviews of adjustments to ensure that everyone can thrive regardless of accessibility need.
Thank you. Thanks for your patience, Teresa. All right, Joni, over to you to give us your big cultural aha moment, and then we'll go to closing comments from the panel.
Yeah, I think so. This feels like a very cliche answer, but I don't know that you can always see cultural change in a moment, because I think it is quite a drawn out process. But I think a lot of the feedback we get, in particular to do with our trans and non-binary and LGBT awareness training, is that so many people just didn't realize so much stuff about it, and there's such a dearth of accessible and grounded information available, that people having this space to ask these questions and think, well, hang on, what about this and what about that, and just have a discussion and get an answer about it. We get so much feedback to say, oh my God, I get it now, it makes sense, I just had never been able to safely ask someone or find somewhere to go. And I think we have a lot of those little moments, and hopefully, based on the feedback we get, it does lead to a lot of change in organisations. So yeah, those are my moments. And I suppose there's one negative one where it motivated change. Where I remember I worked somewhere and there was a kind of a pay dispute going on, and there was an interview with the CEO leaked where she had a big disposable coffee cup of coffee, and she threw her head back and laughed, went, is it really that bad? And I've never seen a workforce unite faster in my life. So it speaks to the importance of being in touch with your workforce and understanding what issues matter to them, because if you get it wrong, that is a uniting moment.
Very, very quickly. Thank you so much. I've really enjoyed speaking to you, and I know most of you a little bit, but have learned even more during the session. So I wanted to say thank you very much. As we close, first of all, to those in the audience, I hope we covered most of the questions. If we didn't, please feel free to reach out to the speakers or myself on the panel. So on this solution, there'll be ways for you to contact us, so please do. The session is recorded, and I'm absolutely certain all of our panel will welcome connecting with you on LinkedIn, so let's do that. Hopefully we'll see some of you in person over the next couple of days, or certainly online for other sessions. And just before we close, Sophie, would you like to give a closing remark? We'll then come to Rebecca and then to Joni, and I will thank you again and send you on your way.
Sure. So if you are in a people team, if you're wondering about how to even go about embedding an EDEI strategy, don't panic. Just start with one small thing, build on it, and iterate is my advice. You're doing something, that's better than doing nothing. You can't, tackle everything in one go. So start somewhere, start small, build on it, and iterate. And thank you very much for having me, Leyoh.
Thank you, Sophie. Rebecca.
Just to build on what you've said, Sophie, I would say go for progress rather than perfection. Small steps are better than no steps, and you learn as you go, and that's really important. I think too. Again, I just want to say thank you for having me on the panel today. It's been really great. It's been great to hear from you, Joni, and Sophie too, about your experiences. And yeah, as you say, if there's other questions unanswered, please put them in this chat, and I'll make sure that I have a look at those and reply to those too. And thank you, Leyoh. Great job.
It's been great fun. Joni, over to you before we close.
Yeah, just again to echo what Rebecca and Sophie have said, and just really thank everybody for coming. It's always really nice to know that there's so many people out there working to get this right and kind of push us in a more favourable direction. And yeah, just to kind of echo what I've said, is that we really have to stand firm in why we do this, why it matters, and you know, not get drawn away into abstract debates, but just really what we're doing is important and has real impact for people. So keep it up, everybody, and thank you.
I totally agree. I'll just leave you with this. One thing I was always told off by my granddad, and he always used to say to me, I hear really well, but I see even better. And I think this is one of those moments when I actually understand what he meant. So considering everything that we've said, let's think about what we can all do within our organisations, within our communities, to demonstrate what we're saying with real action.
Yeah.
Thank you. Enjoy the rest of the sessions for the conference, and I look forward to connecting with you over the next few days.
Thanks, everyone.